Hey folks, today I have something for you may remember but have not heard of in lieu of, let's say, other events. Today we'll cover the civil war in Myanmar, so let's get into it. Alright, to start, some background. Burma, or Myanmar, was a monarchy before the British crept up to them in the late 1880s. Under the British colonial government, the nation was secularized and exploited like many others under the British boot. Colonization would see them dragged into 2 world wars, with the latter seeing a Japanese invasion and occupation as a puppet state under former head of state Ba Ma. Through much suffering, bloodshed, and allied counterattacks, the colony was mostly retaken by the end of the war. This was not the end of the strife for the people of the new state of Burma, as many different ethnic groups made up the young country, and a military government was formed. The soon-to-be last British governor of Burma, Sir Hubert Rance, would seek help from a prominent revolutionary and activist Aung San to help stabilize the country, by inviting him and anti-fascist People's Freedom League members into the Executive Council. Through this council, Burmese independence talks successfully went through, though many groups were critical of the proposed nation. Aung San was able to compromise with many of the minorities in the country on what would come to be known as Union Day, February 12th. The upcoming elections were won by Aung San, the AFP-FL, and many other socialists. But all was not well as the stench of intrigue culminated in the murder of Aung San and several members of their cabinet. This tragedy marked a bloody trend in the country's history, seeing his work undone and a dangerous precedent for rules set. The new democracy would be suspended in 1962 after a coup d'etat. This new government would send the country into isolation, and a dominant Bamar majority as its head. Many were polarized under the topic of nationality and religion. Then in 1988 there was the 8888 uprising, which hoped for democracy to be restored in the country. However, despite the work of those like Aung San Suu Kyi, Aung San's daughter, the military coup d'etat would take place. The military would allow limited democracy in 2011, in which 5 years later Aung San Suu Kyi would become state councillor until the timeline of this video's discussion. It's the early morning of February 1st, 2021. You're scrolling through the internet mindlessly, maybe even watching some mediocre history videos on your phone, when your connection is interrupted. You go to call your friend to see if it's happening to them, but no dial tone. Frustrated, you head back to sleep, worrying about it in the morning. Little did you know you would wake up in a whole new world, though not for the better. The coup has progressed. It started with the detainment of several high-ranking government officials including Aung San Suu Kyi in the early hours of February 1st, as reported by the spokesman of the National League of Democracy, Dr. Miao Nyut, who saw their own detention forthcoming. In the capital, approximately 400 parliament members were put under house arrest. To further facilitate the coup, as noted in the mock experience, phone line kill switches were activated as well as internet blackouts, banks were suspended, and television was experiencing broadcast interruptions. When the media came back online, there was the broadcast on the Tatmadaws backed television network that the current president, Mint Sui, has passed responsibility of legislation, administration, and judiciary to Min Aung Hlaing, an acting general. The new military government justified the coup as the elections had been rigged, and new unbiased elections would be held. Many of the National League of Democracy members, now under arrest by the Tatmadaw, were brought up on Trump charges, with Aung San Suu Kyi being brought up on previously used charge to convict journalists, the export and import law. This would further lead to more unrest and disillusionment in relation to the new governments, seeing mass protests followed by martial law curfew to limit public gathering on February 8th. More and more protesters and government officials would be detained. There was also the standard Not a Q Act, censoring media and blacklisting topics and words. More Tatmadaw soldiers were mobilized to discourage and suppress the process of civil disobedience. Continuing with the arrests, Aung San Suu Kyi would be convicted for 4 years in relation to owning radios in her home and violating COVID protocols. Something the military should be concerned with. Out of the thousands arrested, only about 5,600 have been released. So if protesting is getting you arrested, or your people have been actively getting genocided, did I forget to mention the mass killings occurring in the countryside? Well, you leave the country if you can, and if not, if you truly believe in your beliefs, whether about Islam or democracy, you fight back. Enter the National Unity Government of Myanmar, and their armed wing, the People's Defense Force. This group is made out of members of the National League for Democracy, and other pro-democracy elements, and in solidarity with the many ethnic group paramilitaries resisting the government. Specifically, the People's Defense Force was formed to take back the government and stop the violence and horrors from occurring in the nation. This is the start of the People's Defensive War. People's Defensive War would be a guerrilla war fought across the country, with many dying in the process. Skirmishes would occur frequently over the first month, with the Tatmadaw Brigadier General Pheo Thant detained in response to supposed intention to defect to the PDF in the northwestern portion of Myanmar. What could motivate our PRC-backed government general who wanted to defect to the resistance? If the 8K refugees fleeing to India from their supposedly ransacked and burnt homes has any bearing on the Tatmadaw's method, I can just wonder why. This pattern would persist with the ill-equipped PDF being pushed back by the junta. You see, it's not so simple to get military support nowadays when your opponent has the backing of the mainland Chinese government, so what do? If you're the PDF, you do anything you can to arm your fighters, whether this means the traditional single-shot rifle, the Tumi, drone bombs, as seen in Ukraine, river mines, and other IEDs. Interesting aside, remember J Stark? For those of you who may be ignorant of firearm production, and specifically the production of 3D printed firearms, let me tell you the ballad of the Fuck Gun Control 9. Way back in the olden days, pre-COVID, towards the end of the 2010s, there existed a man called Jacob Duigu, or as they were better known, J Stark 1809. The man was a self- and internet-taught CAD genius, who was an absolutist when it came to the right to bear arms, despite being a German. He cooked up, along with help from deterrence dispensed and the previously designed Shooty AP9, a new design was made similar to the Ludi, using a 3D printer and readily available hardware parts to make a closed-bolt blowback firearm for about $1,000, 3D printer and other equipment included. Takes about a week and a half according to him. Sadly, this newfound popularity was not a particular boon to J Stark's career in the EU, as British financial services had identified him and reported him to the Bundeskriminalamt, however you say that, I don't speak German, where he was raided, where no weapons were found, and was not detained to boot. Flash forward to 2 days later, and he was found dead in his car at his parents' house in Hanover. About 5 hours and 45 minutes from his home in Saarbrücken, on the French border. He allegedly died as a 28-year-old man of a heart attack, and foul play was ruled out in this investigation. There's also been some speculation about him wanting to commit suicide as a member of, extremist groups, so yeah, the usual method seen for earning the CIA Award for Excellence in Journalism. Distributed across the internet, the FGC-9 lives on in a new variant, the Mark II, which has been used in his vision as a weapon of freedom. So where does that leave us now? Over the past year, we have seen rebels taking Kwarkarek, the first major population center to fall. Of course, due to the Tatmadaw's air superiority, thank you China, they withdrew 2 days after being bombed, as that is not a good time when all you can do is take cover and try to avoid getting blown the hell up. This did not stop them, as the Karen National Liberation Army would continue to assault strong points and bases in the south of the country, but would still come under heavy aerial attacks, forcing them to withdraw and attack intermittently. This is just a small glimpse into the dry season campaigns of late 2022 and early 2023. The theme is slow but steady gains on the resistance fronts, and continued atrocities such as the Hapkant massacre, where the Tamada's air power would bomb a concert occurring in Angapa, killing an estimated 80 or more civilians and an unstated amount of Kachin Independence Organization leaders. Of course, the Tamada, not really trying, essentially said,
"You are fake news,"
and that they bombed a rebel army base and would never commit war crimes. Following this, a few months later, they would go on to murder 17 rural civilians in the Sangman region in the Tartane massacre, and followed up with the Shan State killing 30, and the Pasiangi massacre, killing over 165 civilians in celebration of the Thingyang or Burmese New Year. Yeah. The UN condemned this attack, but no action was taken. Good old blue helmets. The junta government, realizing this civil war would be no short campaign as new fronts were still popping up everywhere, decided to rouse up the paramilitaries to reach where they could not. Which gives me hard flashbacks to Indonesia and the death squad paramilitaries of the killings of 1965 to 66. God, I wonder where this is going. The year would see more offensives and hard actions perpetrated on the populace by junta-loyal forces, leading up until late September when the president of the Kachin National Consultative Council, Dua Lashi La, claims that 60% of Myanmar is held by rebel forces. Now into November of this year, there was a massive joint offensive against the Tamada in Kaya State, capturing key junta points, and followed it up with an offensive to take Kokau, which is going on till this day. Also in November, the Arakan army resumed its attacks in Rakhine State, which the junta slowly is pulling back from the front to consolidate its hold on Sitwe, the capital of Rakhine. Well, that is the most up-to-date, verified information I have about the conflict against the legitimate government by those seeking freedom. As we have seen glimpses of the toll of this civil war has taken on the populace, what major effects has this had on your typical citizen? Well, the educational and health systems are in free fall or hit rock bottom already, as schools are being used as impromptu bases for the junta and prisons for political dissidents. The growing food availability is teetering on famine, many are without homes at best and their lives at worst. Poverty is through the roof, the kyat is heading towards the Zimbabwe dollar, and they have joined Iran and North Korea in being blacklisted by the FATF. The Tamada perpetuates sexual violence reminiscent of many past conflicts in the region. Need I remind you? The amount of dead arising, which reportedly tens of thousands of children being killed. The future being snuffed out for a draconian past stain that remains to haunt the people of Myanmar, perpetually keeping the wheels of inequality, suffering, and human darkness spinning as long as they stand. We hope for a better future with the progress made in the past year against the Tamada, but it will take many more to reunite the broken country, and make right the sins of yesteryear for a bright, brave future. Thank you for listening.